Welcome to this Jacksonville for Life radio show hosted by Brad Straley. As Brad could not be here at this moment, I will be sitting in for him. My name is Tom Moran, and on the phone, our guest today is Jennifer Christie. Jennifer has a valuable pro-life story to tell. In it, she was brutally raped and conceived a child as a result. Jennifer, let's begin with what your life was like before the assault.
I think life before the assault was fairly simple. I think you would call us an average family. My husband and I had been married for almost 2 decades at that point. We had 4 children and were living in kind of suburbia. We were a 2-career family and were kind of going every which way. And I was a working sign language interpreter, and I had taken an assignment out of town and was kind of driving back and forth 8 hours on the road and spending 8 hours out of town. And towards the end of the assignment, my husband suggested that I stay in a room up there because it was very hard on me. And so that's what I did. And I rarely took work that would keep me away from home, but it was it just seemed safer than all the driving. And
Sure, your work had you traveling some, and you were traveling for your work in January of 2014.
Right.
So what happened in that?
Okay, so I was staying in the hotel, and on the last day of this 2-week-long assignment, it was snowing, and so work let out early. And I went back to the hotel, and I'm going back to my room, and as I'm opening my door and get the door open, and I drop everything to the floor, and I couldn't hear anyone behind me or see anyone behind me because I was all bundled up. And I turned around to shut the door, and there was a man in my doorway. I think sometimes we assume that there are going to be these internal triggers that let us know that we're supposed to feel frightened, and I didn't have those. I think my mothering instincts almost kicked in. This was a very young-looking man, like college age, and my oldest at the time was only a few years younger than that. And he didn't look scary. He looked fresh-faced and, like he might have been lost. I thought maybe the storm had his cell phone service was out, or his car wouldn't start, or he needed help. And I thought for a second, maybe I could help him. And it all went through my head very, very quickly. And then he kind of gave me a strange smile, and he punched me in the head, pushed me back in the room, and I fought very hard until I couldn't. And as ribs fractured and fingers broke, I tried very hard to crawl somewhere inside of myself. And I remember thinking over and over not to fear man who can cure the body, but he can't touch the soul. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking that whatever was happening to me, he can't touch my soul. And at some point I passed out. I don't know how long I was in that room. And when I woke up, I was wearing almost nothing, and I was outside in the back of the hotel lying on a stairwell in the snow. And I heard a woman screaming, and I realized that I was very hurt. And the woman was wearing the uniform of the hotel housekeeping staff, and she's trying to cover me with her coat, and she's yelling for help. And I was taken to the hospital where I was treated for the broken bones and a brain bleed and some internal injuries, which we didn't quite know the scope of that yet. But I would need 4 surgeries over the next couple of years to repair the damage, and I am likely looking at a 5th, but we're trying to avoid that.
What a nightmare. Raped and suffering, a brain bleed, broken ribs, broken fingers. It's just, how do you bounce back from that? How do you get back on your feet? And You don't really. People talk about the flight or fight thing, and there's also freeze. And no one really talks about that, but there's just that moment where you think this can't possibly be happening. Like this doesn't happen to me. This happens to other people. This happens in movies. And I wasn't bouncing back. I wasn't really reaching out to God the way I should. I was very angry, not necessarily at God, but just at the world. The world was not the place that I thought it was. And I'd been strong enough in my faith to know that bad things happen, that we live in a fallen world, and I'm not exempt from evil happening to me as a believer. So it wasn't an anger directed at God. It was just angry that there was so much evil in the world, that we could do things like that to each other. And
And my husband was trying very, very hard to be a strong presence for me, but he was suffering too, and we were suffering separately and then trying to put on brave faces for each other. We told the children that I was in a car accident to explain my appearance, and it was a bad time, and we weren't looking up together.
Yeah, and then you found out you were pregnant.
It was actually, I was working. And this is something we really struggled with. I had been booked to interpret with 4 other interpreters and a huge group of deaf people on a cruise, and I was booked probably 6 months, 5 months before this all happened, and we really struggled with whether or not I should back out. We knew they would understand, but I was not doing well at home. I was obviously really hurt, but I was very much in my head, and I was jumping at shadows, and I wasn't eating or sleeping, and as I began to heal, and the time got closer, and I didn't, call and back out, my husband was like, look, maybe you should go. You're doing better physically, and you'll be in a place where you're busy all the time, and you're with a lot of other people, and it's a change of scenery, and we also really thought it would be good to resume normal life as quickly as possible. And so I decided I'd go ahead and go, get back into the swing of things, and so I went. It was my job, and, I'd committed, and I went. And I became very, very sick on the second day and was quarantined on the medical unit. And I wasn't getting better with antibiotics. And so the doctor said, we're going to give you something stronger in an IV. Is there any chance you could be pregnant? And I started to immediately say, well, no, because my husband had a vasectomy after my 4th child. It was a very difficult pregnancy. And so I just said no. And then I kind of stopped. And for the first time out loud, I said, I've been raped. And it was such a heavy, ugly word. And I said, you might want to test me. And she did. And it was positive. And she said, you've been really sick. We need to take you to get an ultrasound. We're going to make an emergency stop. And so the next day we were in Cartagena, Colombia, and they took me to a little hospital and gave me an ultrasound. And that's the first time I saw the little P on that screen. That would be my son.
And you've experienced a pregnancy before. You've seen ultrasounds before. What did you think this time?
It's very counterintuitive to everything that the world tells you should feel. The world says all the time, we need to have abortion in cases of rape because how horrific and how disgusting that a woman would have to carry, the product of rape and all of that. And I think maybe even as a Christian, somewhere in my mind, I thought, well, that makes sense. Like, that would be horrible and that would be awful. And here I am in the darkest time, the most painful thing I've ever lived through. And I'm on this ultrasound, this medical table, staring at this ultrasound screen in this foreign country, completely surrounded by strangers. And I'm looking at this dot on the screen, which I know what it is. Like you said, I've been there before. And for the first time since I'd been attacked, I felt something come alive in me again. And for the first time since I'd been attacked, I felt joy and light and hope and a reason to keep going. And I remember thinking I couldn't protect myself, but I could protect my baby. And that's all it ever felt like, my baby. And it was like I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't alone in this. And like we could do this together, this child and I. I remember thinking, okay, kid, like you and me, we can do this together.
Wow, Jennifer. Secular society would have you believe that is not normal.
It's not unusual. It's not unique. Talking to mothers from rape and statistically what mothers from rape feel, that feeling is very common.
You're not alone. Your husband, you have to tell him. How does that conversation go?
I went back to the ship, and he knew I'd been sick. We'd been emailing. They let me call him. I didn't want to preamble. He picked up the phone, and I just said, are you sitting down? And I know that's not a real positive way to begin a conversation, but I just wanted to get right to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm pregnant. And obviously, he knew. People are like, wouldn't he think that? No. It had been 8 years since this vasectomy. He knew. We knew. And I'm pregnant. And there was just a second of silence, and he just said, okay. And I said, what is okay? What do you mean okay? And he just said, sweetheart, he said, this is a gift. he said, this child is a blessing. This is something beautiful that's come from something so painful and ugly. He said, we love babies. And I said, yeah, we love babies. And he said, we can do this, you and me. This will be awesome. We can do this.
Wow.
I mean, he said the perfect thing. You know, I mean, if I had written in the script, it could have done it better. But I wasn't surprised because I knew, you know, like I said, we've been married 2 decades. We met in youth group when we were teenagers. I wasn't surprised because I knew the man I married. I knew who I was getting into this with. I knew what our foundation was built on. So, it was a absolutely perfect thing to say.
We will pause for a quick break and be right back with the rest of Jennifer Christie's story.
Are you or is someone you know facing an unplanned pregnancy? You are not alone. Women's Help Center is here with support and help. All of our services are free and confidential. Call Women's Help Center at 904-398-5143 or go to our website at www.pregnancyjacks.com.
Welcome back to the Jacksonville for Life show. I am Tom Moran, filling in for Brad Straley, and we are going to continue the pro-life story of Jennifer Christie, a wife, a mother, who was brutally raped and conceived a child from the violent assault. And she was just telling us how she and her husband did not hesitate to agree that this child, this baby boy, was innocent, and they would protect him and give him a God-given right to life and raise him up in their family with their other 4 children. Jennifer, had you known of somebody before in the same situation or circumstances?
Well, no. I'd never known or even heard of anyone becoming pregnant from rape except, you know, in the movies or something. And so we get back home, and we didn't tell very many people at first. And I reached out to a close friend, and she said, you know, I just heard about someone who was conceived in rape. Have you ever heard of Rebecca Kiesling? And no, I hadn't. We weren't in the pro-life world at all. And she said, you really should look her up. And so I did. And I reached out to her, and she called me that night immediately, and we spent hours on the phone. Rebecca is the founder and president of an organization called Save the One. And Save the One is a global network of hundreds and hundreds of mothers from rape and men and women who were conceived in rape. And it's really a family, and she immediately put me in touch with other mothers who had conceived in rape and, you know, who love their children, and whether they place them for adoption or are raising them. And it was invaluable to be able to talk to other women who've walked this path that I was, you know, getting ready to travel. And because other people in my life, even people who considered themselves pro-life, other people who considered themselves Christian, were telling me, you know, you're out of your mind. Like, this is not what you want. This is going to be a reminder for the rest of your life. You're never going to heal. You know, this is why we have abortion. I had Christians telling me, Jennifer, like, God will understand. And you have a direct pipeline to God that he will understand why I'm destroying my child, you know, because of a crime that he didn't exist at the time. It kind of blew my mind at how many people seem to make this exception for killing an innocent child. And it was very difficult. So it was very precious to me to be able to hear from women who've been there and said, no, it's perfectly natural and normal to love your child and to see this as your child and to feel protective. And it was really the best support that I could have gotten at that time. It was a very difficult pregnancy, and I was still getting over the assault. We were still working through that, you know, as a couple and me as a woman. And at the same time, we were preparing for the joy of having a baby, which is a joy.
The pressure from, like you said, well-meaning Christians in your church, your neighborhood, your friends, and where did they get that information from? Where are they getting that faulty premises from?
Well, like you said, I mean, people think my story is so extraordinary, and it isn't. It's the more common response, but you don't hear it. The mainstream media does not want you to hear that. You know, I speak all over the world, and people are always, you know, Jennifer has an amazing, extraordinary story, and I always say, no, I don't really. It's just that a lot of women like me don't speak up because you get a lot of hate. There's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of negativity. And I'm called all kinds of names. We get all kinds of threats, all kinds of nasty, nasty mail. And it's really unpleasant. And so it doesn't encourage a lot of mothers from rape to speak up. But this is the norm. You know, about 85% of us who become pregnant after rape give our children life. And again, that's not what you hear. That's not what Planned Parenthood, that's not what the pro-choice crowd wants you to hear, because it goes against the big business of abortion. It goes against their rhetoric that they seem to be pushing down people's throats. And it's ugly, and it's so damaging, and it's just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time after I speak, I have women every time come up to me who were raped and aborted the child that they conceived 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 years ago, and they're telling me their stories, and they're crying. They're crying about it. They're saying, I wish I had your strength. And I don't consider it strength at all. It was just something that we did because you're pregnant and you have a baby, and that was just, it wasn't a choice to us. It was just, there was no question. But the women who aborted, even decades later, are still damaged by it. So I don't at all believe when people tell me, their pathway to healing, it was their choice, and their pathway to healing was, to compound the violence and compound the trauma by an abortion. I do not believe for a second that that's healing. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see over and over again just the pain and the scarring that just doesn't go away.
Like these women were lied to, and this lie that life wasn't valuable, and now they know better. So many years later, not even years later, and the tears, the hurt. Wow. And will you tell your son and your other children about the assault?
Oh, yeah. We, in the beginning, when I first got pregnant, before talking to Rebecca, before talking with other women, it was, no, this thing we'll take to the grave. And even if there wasn't the internet, even if you couldn't Google and find, crime scene photos and all that kind of thing, even if in 8th grade he wouldn't be doing a science project and realize that his blood type might not be the same as his dad's, meaning my husband's,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want him to think that there's anything to be ashamed of. He didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing shameful in his story. His story is one of beauty for ashes. He was given to us to heal us. This does not mean that we think God planned the rape. Let me be clear, because we've, I've heard that before. No, I don't think God planned the rape. This is something that was, God, this is what God does. He makes beautiful things out of things that are evil. What the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good. And that's what the story is. My children know about this. They're much older. I have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and we didn't actually want to tell them quite so soon, the younger one anyway, but once the 15-year-old is a big mouth, and once he found out, the whole gang, everyone needed to know. And they've handled it very well, and for their ages, they know age appropriately. They know as much as they need to, and they've all been wonderful. They love their little brother. He's 3. He's adorable, and he's also 3-year-old. He's a pain, and he's a sibling. That's all. Mm-hmm. I talk about this, but it's really not a big deal. In our family, it's just our family, and we'll be able to tell this precious little boy that he came into our family at a time when we were broken and hurting and couldn't make sense of this world anymore. And he brought us together, and he healed us, and we wouldn't be the people that we are today without him. And he showed us again that there is good and beauty even among this broken, dark place.
Mm. That's right. And the one thing,
was a gift.
What a precious gift. For us listeners and disciples of Jesus Christ, what else can we do if we come across somebody in our life who has been raped, assaulted? How can we support them and get them through this trial?
Right. You're talking about women who conceive and rape? Right.
Yes, who are raped and conceive, and then they're getting pressure. Oh, go ahead and abort the baby.
because there will be a tremendous amount of pressure. And people telling her all the time, this is horrific, and you'll never be able to move on, and you need to forget. And that's the biggest lie, that you'll forget. You'll forget if you have this abortion, you'll be able to forget. And no, that you'll never be able to forget. But at that time, the idea of forgetting dangling over your head, you'll do anything to forget. I think the most important thing is connecting her with people who've actually been there, connecting her with other mothers from rape who'll be able to come alongside her and hold her hand and saying, you can absolutely do this, and this is going to be, this will be okay, and it'll be beautiful, and we're here for you, and we'll be with you every step of the way. And Save the One is a great resource for her, and there are people all around the world who can, like for me, who can be there and just, we've done this, and we're here, and we've got you, because she's going to have enough opposition. She needs people who've been there and who understand, who really understand. Because every time you hear someone saying that, abortion is the way and this isn't what you want, it's not mothers from rape that you're hearing from. It's not people who really understand. So she needs people who understand and who are on her side. And I don't think it's necessarily people who wish her ill, who are trying to tell her, you need to forget, I believe a lot of the people who are around me who were pushing abortion meant well. They thought that it was in my best interest, but they didn't understand. And that's the thing, they're deceived. They don't know. She needs to be around people who know.
And that's why you're getting this out there. And so that's Save the One. That's Save the, and then the
Save
number
the One. It's the number one.
.com.
.com.
But when somebody says, well, now does the rapist have parental rights? Does that come up?
This is really a fear tactic that the other side uses a lot. Like, if I had, my rapist will have parental rights. And I mean, especially when people talk about, your rapist gets parental rights, people think about, in my situation, like he'll just come and he'll take away the baby. And so it freaks people out. But most of the time, when you hear about things like that, it's a spousal rape, where he's been raping his wife for years, and then, they have children, and then they divorce, and he, gets partial custody. That's what they're talking about. But, the pro-choice, I use that so loosely, kind of steps in, and it's like, well, a rapist is getting parental rights. Well, technically, yes, but it's not what you think, and it's just a fear tactic. It does happen. There's a lot of misconceptions with it. There are cases where it can happen, usually in cases where the rapist is a spouse, and it can get sticky with, if a woman is raped by her husband. There are avenues where a rapist's parental rights can be revoked. There, like Rebecca Kiesling is an attorney. There are people who spend their lives working on a rapist's rights being terminated. A few years ago, there were 32 states that offered zero protection for a woman as far as her rapist getting any kind of rights. Right now, there are 44 states that offer protection, and there are more states every day. So it's not a problem the way they make it out to be. It's very rare, and when something like that does happen, there are definitely avenues. It's not a reason to not have a child. It's not a reason to end the life of your child because of something infrequent that might happen someday. That's important to know. There are always horrific things that happen, but there are a lot of support. There are a lot of attorneys out there who work pro bono to get those kind of things, to get those laws changed, those archaic laws, changed and women and children protected. That's it, to get the facts. And so we've just come to the end of our time here, but it's important, people, please go to Save the One, the number one.com, Save the One. Number one. And get more information. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing the story. Again, keep up the good work, and thank you for sharing. That's never easy, but God is good. God is good. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. There's more information for you at jacksonvilleforlife.org.